Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week I'm making another cart. This week it's for the mitre saw, the bandsaw and the drill press. See you in a minute. Now I know I've done a lot of carts so far of aluminium and this is not a lot different, so I shall skip most of the construction side of it. The only difference here is that it's fairly multi-purpose. It's got to house the mitre saw, it's got to cope with the bandsaw and the drill press, hold them all together on the one cart, which is only 600mm wide. And I also want to put a downdraft table on top at some point, which will also be a follow-up video. And I want some dust extraction for the mitre saw, which is perhaps the dirtiest thing in the shed at the moment. So it's a little bit more involved in that it's got to suit all of those things and it's got to have some built-in dust extraction. So this is how I've gone about the build. Now, as with other builds, I'd ordered all the aluminium pre-cut from KJN Aluminium over in Leicester, who provide a pretty good service. It all arrived exactly as I wanted it, cut to length, and so it was very much a repeat of the previous carts that I've done for the underbench for the TWX7 router table, and the actual dust extraction system. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time on that. It was a fairly straightforward matter of putting casters on the bottom of a piece of 3/4 ply. I've cut out all of the bottom aluminium on these later carts because the plywood suffices to keep it all rigid and square, and then really it was straightforward enough putting the casters on and screwing the uprights into the bottom piece using the I think they're 10mm tech screw that self-threads itself in. Right, now what we've got so far is pretty much what I'm doing generally on the carts. It's the revised one that I did under the Triton workbench. Just a plain 3/4 ply base and aluminium uprights and top rails. This one is 80mm lower than the general height of the worktops, and that's so that when I sit the chop saw on top it'll sit level with it. But the other change is that I've got a different section for the back of it. These are a bit more hefty, these are 4080s, and they're going to go upright like that, and we'll see how I get on with that, but that effectively gives me a small upstand at the back, partly to aid dust collection and partly to help with the design of a sliding panel that I'm going to use. I'm going to get some plywood that will slide up and down in the back part of the channel, whereas the front part will be used to hold the whole thing together, and this will slide up out of the back and with any luck also fold forwards over, and maybe if I'm lucky and get it designed right, have some side wings come out, all of which will mean that the collection from the chop saw will be much more contained within the structure, and then when it's not being used for the chop saw these will slide out the way. It's interesting to see the strength in this stuff. I've just realised that without thinking about it, I've effectively been using this as a workbench, drilling all the timber, and there's not actually any support on this. This is purely just cantilevering out from the back rails. So it's fairly rigid just on its own, without any vertical supports at all. Now the cart's finished for the chop saw itself. I've got the top on it. That is 80mm below the surfaces of the other workbenches I've got, so that pulls the chop saw through level when it's sitting on there, and that makes everything work well as an outfield table. Anything that I've got will work as an outfeed table in the shed, more or less. And then I can put the downdraft table on top. The reason for the double section at the back is now a bit more apparent. I'm intending to have a piece of plywood or MDF, I don't know quite which yet, which will slide up, and that will become a back stop for the chop saw itself to keep all the muck and dirt contained. There'll be some sort of a stop on it, and possibly it will fold in the middle so that it will come over the top of the chop saw, and hopefully there may even be room for sides. Because there's a bit of a gap there, I can have two sides that will fold round as long as they don't interfere with the chop saw. I've got to work all that out so that it will then enable it to be pretty much a contained space at the back of the chop saw. I got some plastic strip this time when I had the delivery, which fits into the slots on the 4040 aluminium, and I got it principally to just keep the dust out, because one of the things I have found is that there's an awful lot of sawdust and muck gets into those channels, and this is just basically a very cheap way of sealing them up. It also neatens up the top surface anyway and makes it a bit more usable. The only reason I've kept the slots clear on some of the carts is so that I can get the clamps sliding in the top T section, but for most purposes I don't need it. And there's also a brush strip that I've got, which I've fitted in the back of the rail, which will give some sort of a seal on the vertical sliding panel that goes in, that comes up and down. The side pieces also slot in more easily now with those strips to retain them. It stops it sliding forward. I'd made some pieces to house around the chop saw, some of which are in use all the while and some of which will be removable when I want to put it on at an angle. So I've just drilled some very small pilot holes right through both pieces of MDF, and then open those out with I think it's about a 6mm, 5 or 6mm drill, and push fit into those some rare earth neodymium magnets to just hold it all together while the thing is assembled. And it saves having hinges or anything else that I've got by way of screws or anything to hold it together. The magnets themselves are perfectly strong enough to hold the whole system together. It is important to make sure that you get the polarity of the magnets right, so that they actually stick together rather than repel. Well, here I am, several sheets of plywood and MDF further on, and I think we've finally got somewhere. It's taken an awful lot of work. I perhaps should have started by making a mock-up out of foam core board or something like that, because it doesn't matter how many times you do something with this, you change one thing very slightly and it throws the whole thing off. I had started with some uprights either side to make a cowl that's slotted in plywood, and they were okay, except that by the time I'd finished, the plywood has gone considerably warped, and the same on the back shutter that I'd made, that's warped as well. So I junked the plywood, and while I was doing that I took the opportunity to move the depth. I did notice that the cowl itself was fine, it was at the back, but it really could have come as far forward as the fence and would have probably been more use. So I've gone for MDF in the end, and this is where we are now. 2 sheets of MDF, one of plywood further on, and an awful lot of waste. There are 2 brackets that fit in either side, and because I've got the little infills in the metal section that stop all the dust getting in, they form a nice solid retainer for those side pieces. So the side pieces slot in. Now the fence itself, the cover itself, I mean, is always the same on one side. I can use that side. I've put little magnets on the side of that to hold it, and that will work from 45 one way, 50 degrees one way I think, to 50 degrees the other way. So that will never change at all. The problem comes on the right hand side, where there isn't much masking anyway. Same thing, a couple of magnets, holds it all together. For the majority of work with a straightforward right angle cut, that'll be fine. But when I want to go either that way or that way, I get problems. So that is removable for that purpose, and as I say, the magnets seem to be the ideal solution to that. Now the back, still got the sliding shutter, it's a bit larger. That comes up and just hinges forward. You can see there I've had to do a small cutout in the top to take the blade when it twisted round to one side. So I've just done a hole in the top and then covered it over with a small plate. But that all now holds together quite perfectly okay. I've just got to sort an outlet for the vacuum to pull the dust out. But I think that's probably as far as I'm going with it at the moment. So that's the final assembly method. The 2 sides are slotted in. The front face fence covers are put in with magnets. The one on the right, as I said before, is optional. And then at the rear, the cover is just slid up and over to form the housing. Now putting it away is just a simple reverse procedure. I've got to find somewhere to store the pieces. There are 4 pieces that are loose at the moment, and I'll probably put those on the back of that sliding panel, but it's a matter of seconds to get the thing back to a position where I've got an empty bench to either put the bandsaw, the pillar drill, or even the downdraft table. Well, I hope that was of interest. It's useful now that I can at least keep the dust from the mitre saw contained, and hopefully when we get onto the dust extraction for the downdraft table as well, it'll prove useful for that one as well. Hope you enjoyed the video. Look forward to seeing you next week. See you then. Bye.